Funding for this program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, and generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs. From Wall Street to Main Street, from farm field to factory floor, from small towns to urban Iowa, the issues of '08 are mounting. Tonight from the studios of Iowa Public Television, a conversation between the candidates seeking to represent Iowa in the Senate. Here is David Yepsen of the Des Moines Register.
Hello, I'm David Yepsen of the Des Moines Register, and welcome to our conversation with the candidates. Our guests tonight are the two people running for United States Senator from Iowa in November's election. Democrat Tom Harkin of Cumming is the incumbent. Senator Harkin is 68 years old and is seeking his fifth term in the U.S. Senate. Republican Christopher Reed of Marion is the challenger. Mr. Reed is 36 and operates a small business in Cedar Rapids. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Thank you for joining our conversation tonight. We appreciate you taking time to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Going back for many years, my newspapers had a tradition of holding debates and forums among leading candidates for public office in Iowa. Our goal is simple: to help voters get the information they need to make their voting decisions. We'd like to thank Iowa Public Television for its help and commitment to broadcasting many of these events to their statewide audience. Their goal is the same as ours: helping Iowans perform their civic duty. Our format tonight is a conversation. It's not a formal debate. I'll ask questions and we'll kick things around. And since we're all Iowans here, I'd like to run this as we would a visit over coffee in an Iowa cafe. Well, Senator Harkin, I'll start with you. You're the incumbent. Why should voters give you another term?
Well, first of all, David, let me thank you and also Iowa Public Television and the Des Moines Register for sponsoring this. I also just want to thank so many Iowans for all of their support and their help for me and my wife and my family through all of these years. It is a distinct privilege and honor to represent you in the United States Senate. During these very tough, turbulent times, what we need in the Senate is a steady, effective hand. And I believe my service has shown that I can provide that steady and effective leadership. The one thing that has always guided me is this one simple principle: always remember where you came from and who sent you to represent them. You know, I was born and raised in a small town in Iowa. My dad was a coal miner most of his life. Only had an 8th grade education. My mother was an immigrant. Together they raised 6 kids in a very small house. In fact, I was the youngest. I still live in that house that I was born in a small town of Cumming. We didn't have much, but I was able to work hard and go through Iowa State. Served 5 years in the Navy as a Navy pilot. I'm still a proud member of the local American Legion Club 562 in Cumming. My wife Ruth and I just celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary. We have 2 wonderful daughters, 2 grandkids, so in many ways you might just say we're kind of your neighbors here in Iowa. I want to return to the Senate because, as I said, in these very turbulent times, we need steady and effective leadership. We need leadership that will get the economy going again, provide health care for all that's affordable and accessible, get our education so that kids like me that don't have much can afford to go to college without a mountain of debt on their heads. I also want to continue my service to Iowans. Nothing makes my day better. It makes me feel better than when I can help an Iowan with a Social Security problem or a disability problem, or maybe it's a small business with a problem with IRS, or it's a family that has a loved one in the military overseas, or it's helping a community recover from the floods and the tornadoes of this year, or it's helping a family make sure that they can get the kind of medicine and medical care they need for an elderly. So these are the things that I like to do. As I say, we need steady and effective leadership. That's what I bring to this. All right.
I want to get into some of those issues in a minute, but I want to turn to you, Mr. Reed. Why should you go to the U.S. Senate? Why should you replace Senator Harkin?
I want to go to Washington because I believe Washington is broken, and I don't believe it can be fixed by sending the same man back for a 5th term. It's been 34 years. I was 3 years old when he went to the Congress. I was playing with Tonka trucks when he was a rookie. Now it's going to take someone to go in there and fix the messes that have been created. It's been a long, long time of earmarks and overspending, over-government regulation, anti-business atmosphere, and that needs to stop. We need to start putting emphasis on Main Street instead of Wall Street. We need somebody who can go to Washington and represent the people and not large corporations and special interests. Someone like myself who has no ties to special interests can get there and get the work done for the American people, put their boot in the ground and say, no more, I'm not going any further. People of Iowa and the people of America need a true leader.
Senator Harkin, what's your reaction to that?
To
what he just said?
No.
Time for a change.
Obviously, some of the things I can agree with that Christopher just said. We do need people to represent Iowans, and that's what I've done. My record is very clear. I fought very hard, whether it's helping get a farm bill through that helps Iowa maintain its leadership in biofuels and wind energy, or conservation, making sure we have a strong safety net for farmers. I'm on the Small Business Committee working to make sure we have less rules and regulations and red tape for small businesses all over this country. I'm on the Health Committee, and we've got a big job ahead of us to do in terms of straightening out our healthcare system. That's going to be one of the big things we've got to do in the next couple of years. We've got to get a healthcare system that is affordable, accessible, as I say, that provides healthcare to every family so there's nobody between you and the doctor. And lastly, a healthcare system that puts emphasis on prevention and wellness.
But Senator, if the question really comes down to, haven't you had your turn? I mean, 34 years, people want some change in Washington. Mm-hmm. Why isn't getting a new senator evidence of how we need time for a change?
Well, the fact is, I have fought for change all my life. Just look at my record. I first started changing things when I first went there. The Americans with Disabilities Act, my bill, my signature bill of perhaps my lifetime, changed the way we live in America. I changed the way we did medical research. I provided 3 times more money for breast cancer research. Now women with breast cancer are living longer, so I changed that. I changed the system under which we do agriculture, putting more emphasis on conservation and biofuels. So I've worked for change all my life. Now, the thing is, do you just change it by changing the person? Are you going to get something changed if you send a person to Washington that agrees with Bush and Cheney and the economic policies that have bankrupted this country? I don't think so.
Okay,
Senator,
I want to respond to that, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, he has represented change in Washington. He went to Washington as a man of average means. He's now worth $20 million. He has a home in the Bahamas. His wife sits on the board of ConocoPhillips. He just tried to tie me to the Bush-Cheney politics. I am not tied to the Bush-Cheney, anything to do with their campaign. But it's the Democrats who have had leadership the last 2 years. And over the last 2 years, this country is seeing gas prices double, home prices plummet, consumer confidence fall, and unemployment rise. It's not just time for change. In his mind, change in Washington just means rearranging the seats there. We need reform in Washington. We need to change the way things are done. He brought up what he does for small business. National Federation Independent Senator has you listed with a 0% rating for small businesses. The National Taxpayers Union has you listed as a big spender. That is not a friend of small business. That's a friend of Wall Street. Small business in this country, I'm a small business owner. That's what got me into this race, is your 0% rating. We have to have people in Washington who look out for small businesses. 62% of Americans are employed by small business in this country. We can no longer overlook them and just look to Wall Street and give them a $700 billion bailout. We can't afford to do that anymore. It's got to be the little guy, and it can't just be rhetoric, say, I look out for the little guy. Look at all the money my seniority brings back to the state. Let's look at some of that seniority. CTEC. Your seniority gave them $1.4 million, and now all their leadership is in prison. They're convicted felons. Your earmarks, one earmark for you that you call Harkin grants that you bring back to this country or this state, one person in Iowa will never pay in taxes in their entire lifetime the amount of one earmark that you put in there.
Well, Senator, he's just thrown a lot at you here, so I'll give you a chance to respond to it.
Well, I think, first of all, David, I think what I hear Iowans tell me as I travel around the state is that, these kinds of personal attacks and stuff, that doesn't solve anything. That doesn't help anyone get a job. That doesn't help anyone get a better education. These kinds of personal attacks don't get anything done. I think what people want us to do is, what are our plans? What do we want to do in the future? Obviously, they're going to hire one of us to represent them for the next 6 years. So
I've said,
stating the fact, let Senator finish.
All right. I've said in health care, for example, We need to do more in prevention and wellness. We need to, for example, let Medicare, for example, be able to buy drugs the same way the Veterans Administration does, where they're 50% cheaper for veterans than they are in Medicare. Well, we need to change that. In education, we need to make loans cheaper for our kids to go to college, more Pell Grants so they can get through school, and energy independence. We're spending $600,000 a minute right now, every minute of every day, for imported oil. The way to get rid of that, I started that in the Farm Bill in 2002 by putting the first ever energy title in agriculture, and we expanded it this time to provide more biofuels, more wind energy, more renewable energy. That's where the jobs of the future are going to be. Iowa can lead the nation in this. That's what I want to do.
Mr. Reed, isn't Senator Harkin's seniority worth something to Iowa? I mean, a lot of schools like those grants. It's possible he may be in a position to actually write the health care reform bill, regardless of who the next president is. Isn't that worth something to Iowa?
Is that what? Okay. Well, let's look at that. First of all, the seniority, any senator is going to take care of their state. But when you say the seniority brings money back, we need to remember these Harkin grants, it's not him and Ruth writing a check to the state. It's taxpayer money. It's not the government's money, it's the people's money. And people need to remember that. And if he's really taking care of Iowans, why is there a Harkin building in Atlanta, Georgia? And a Harkin Center for the Arts in Los Angeles? And the only building in Iowa that bears his name is the CTEC building. That's not looking out for everyday Iowans.
Senator?
Well, you know, one of the things I really believe can help our economy is getting more jobs and investing in the infrastructure of our country. And one of the ways to do that is to help our schools build new schools and modernize their schools. And Mr. Reed is right. I have worked very hard, and I'm very proud of the fact over the last 10 years, I have brought $121 million into this state that's gone through the Department of Education, that has gone to over 304 of our 362 school districts in Iowa. I asked Mr. Reed he should go out and talk to Superintendent Dave Harold up at Waukon, see if they think that was a good thing to get to help them build the addition to the high school, or John Sheldall, the superintendent in Ottumwa. Ask him about every one of their buildings in their school district, because now meets fire and safety code because of these. Or ask Paula Vincent over at North Liberty, near where you live. They built a new elementary school there for their kids from these grants. East High School here in Des Moines built an addition. Do I think these are good things? You bet I do. And I stand behind every one of them, because I think we need to help our schools modernize and become the best they are. And if I'm reelected, I can tell you I'm going to continue to do everything I can to get monies to help improve our schools in the state of Iowa.
I want to move on. Voters, Mr. Reed, voters tell us all, and I'm sure you've heard it too, they want less partisanship in Washington. They want less bickering. How would you bring that about?
Well, first of all, when a bill comes up, I ask two questions. Is this bill good for Iowa? Is this bill good for America? Then I sign it. I don't have to look over and see which party wrote the bill. I don't have to call my special interest friends to see how they want me to vote. Mr. Harkin has a 97% record of voting strictly with his party. That doesn't show bipartisanship. We need someone to go there that will not care which party wrote the bill, but solely look and see if that bill is good for America.
Senator, what will you do in a fifth term that you haven't done in the first four to tone it down, to bring less partisanship? You hear that from people. They're tired of the fighting.
They are tired. Well, I point to my record again. I have a history of working across the aisle to get things done. Heck, in my first term in the House, I put a human rights amendment that's now still part of the law. I couldn't have done that unless I worked bipartisanly. The Americans with Disabilities Act that the first President Bush signed into law in July of 1990. I worked with Bob Dole, and I worked with Dick Lugar. I worked with Orrin Hatch, who was really my chief sponsor on it, to get it through. And I worked with the administration. That was bipartisan. I worked to get funding for the National Institute of Health with Arlen Specter, Senator Specter, and I worked very closely together in a bipartisan fashion to get more money for biomedical research. The Farm Bill, my goodness, I just brought a Farm Bill through as the chairman of the committee and chairman of the conference. I brought through a Farm Bill. When I got it through committee, it didn't have one dissenting vote. I got it through the floor of the Senate with 79 votes, more votes than any Farm Bill has ever gotten in history. That's bipartisan work, and I know how to do that, and I've been doing it. Dick Lugar, Senator Lugar, and I have legislation in that's going to change For example, automobiles, put flexible fuel automobiles out there on the road. Mandate that gas stations are going to have to put in ethanol pumps in the future. That's going to be good for Iowa. And that's how I do. I work bipartisanly. My record shows that.
Mr. Reed, what about that? What's your reaction to what he just said?
Yeah, I would like to mention another bit of bipartisan work that he did in 2000 with the Commodity Futures Modernization Act that he's a co-sponsor of, that's made it legal for Wall Street companies to gamble with our money. Co-sponsored right here, as you can see, by Senator Tom Harkin. And I think that shows poor leadership. And that was bipartisan, you're correct, but doesn't make it good for the country.
Care to respond?
I guess I'm just going to be fending off attacks here for the next 45 minutes.
You are the incumbent.
Well, that's okay.
It's not an attack when it's the truth.
That's all right. The Commodity Futures Modernization Act was, now keep in mind, I was in the minority at that time. Dick Lugar, my good friend, was the chairman of the committee. And we did have to modernize the exchanges to bring them up to date so we had better regulation, better controls. What happened was that Senator Phil Gramm and others wanted to exclude from the jurisdiction of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission jurisdiction over swaps and derivatives. We'd never had that before. I mean, it's not that we had the jurisdiction and they took it away. We'd never had it. Brooksley Bourne, who was the chairperson of the CFTC at that time under President Clinton, wanted to regulate derivatives. Wall Street came in and they didn't want that to happen. If you read the record, you will see that I questioned Alan Greenspan about this. It's in the record. I said, what's going to happen if we don't regulate them and some problem happens, and who's going to have the jurisdiction to go there and stop it? Greenspan's answer was, that's an interesting question. But he said the market, the free market, will handle that. Well, today, just this morning, Alan Greenspan said they were wrong. Now, what happened on that bill, we never had a chance to vote on it. That's the problem. They brought it out. A number of us would have liked to have amended it on the floor, but the Republicans would not bring it out on the floor. They put it into an overall spending bill right before Christmas in 2000, and responsibly we had to pass the bill to keep the government functioning, so we never really had a vote on it. So the driver behind excluding this was really Phil Gramm, Alan Greenspan, the President's Working Group, and Wall Street. Now, to the extent that Chris wants to talk about it, absolutely. And we have to control those. I had a hearing just about a week and a half ago of my Senate committee in Washington. And I am preparing legislation right now that will do two things. It will outlaw certain kinds of these swaps and derivatives, and the rest of them put them on a regulated exchange so that we know who's buying, who's selling, how many are out there, and do they have enough collateral to back up what they're doing. Problem with AIG, what happened in New York, is that AIG didn't have enough money to back it up. You see, but a regulated exchange, David, a regulated exchange, if you two guys are dealing in swaps, right now you can do it under the table, in the dark. It's opaque. No one knows what's going on. But if we say you have to do it on an exchange, and I'm the exchange, and you're buying and he's selling, I can say, do you have enough money? Let's see, let's make sure you have enough money to cover your side of the bet. That's what's not being done right now.
So it's kind of like closing the barn door after the cows have all left the building.
I want to go to another subject, Mr. Reed. Judicial appointments.
Okay.
The next president is going to nominate probably at least two members of the United States Supreme Court. You are pro-life.
Correct.
Could you vote for a Supreme Court justice who was pro-choice?
No.
Just flat out no.
No. Strict constitutionalist judges.
And Senator, what about you? You're pro-choice. Could you vote for Supreme Court justices who consider themselves pro-life?
Yes, and I have in the past.
So it's not a litmus test.
Not a litmus test for me, no. And I have voted for a pro-life justice in the past. I voted for pro-choice justices in the past. That's not a litmus test with me.
Let's turn our conversation here to some of the issues that are in this campaign. One thing I hear about out there, and I'm sure you do as well, Senator, is the bailout, the rescue package. You voted against it, and then you changed, you voted for it. Why did you vote for this thing?
No, we only had one vote for it, David.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We only had one vote for it.
On final passage.
Yeah,
you
that's
voted,
right.
Right. Why?
Well, because the choice was either do something or do nothing, and nothing was not an option. Here's what I was hearing from Iowa. You know, we're an agriculturally based state. Farmers rely heavily on credit, especially in the winter. When those crops come in, farmers got to start borrowing for fuel and for fertilizer, for seed corn, for machinery and equipment. And what I was hearing is that if we didn't do something, and already credit was starting to tighten up for farmers in Iowa. I also heard from small businesses and retail owners and automobile sellers. Their credit was tightening up. Principal Financial in Iowa employs 9,000 people in this state, and I talked to them. Wells Fargo employs 12,900 people in this state. These are good jobs. These are our fellow Iowans. Their jobs are on the line. And so we had to do something. Now, again, was it perfect? No, it wasn't perfect. I'd be the first to admit that. But sometimes you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Mr. Reed, how would you have voted?
I would have voted no.
Why?
Because the economy runs in cycles. Roosevelt said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Now, with the bailout, we gave a $700 billion check to a group of 5 people who we're supposed to entrust with this money. And when the Congress voted down the first bill that was 3.5 pages and $700 billion, they voted no and the market fell 777 points. Then we had 2 federal holidays where Congress was out of session and the market came back up halfway by itself. Then the Senate took that bill, added 450 pages and another $150 billion. They passed it, it became law, and we've been in a market free fall since. That was a knee-jerk reaction to a potential problem. And seldom in life does a knee-jerk reaction become the right solution to a problem. We needed a cooler heads prevail situation, look back and sit back and look at the problem. Now they had several, even Nobel laureates, come in and have different solutions than just a bailout. Congress and the Senate did not want to hear anything but bailout, and they took that path and they ran with it. And we've been in a market free fall since.
Give me an example of what you would have done differently.
Well, I would have listened to more than just the bailout scenario. There were people clamoring to get in there that had ideas other than a bailout. But let's say if we had that money, why not lend it to Wall Street instead of give it to them? And before they can take their next $9 million bonus at the end of the year, make sure the taxpayers are paid back the money they borrowed. And plus, then they might not need the whole $700 billion if they're getting it on a loan cycle. We have since been giving out more money. We got into the banking system, buying stocks in banks. I don't think the American government should be in the business of buying mortgages and being shareholders in businesses. I think it was a knee-jerk reaction that cooler heads would have prevailed. And as the loan goes, when you give a loan to a company, they're more responsible because they have to pay it back. If we just give them the money as a blank check, they can still have their bad behavior. And just what we did with that bailout was rewarded bad behavior.
Senator, knee-jerk?
No, first of all, the House bill that passed is much different than what we finally took up in the Senate. The administration's bill was, as Chris said, was like 3 pages long. It gave the Secretary the power to do everything with absolutely no oversight. In the Senate, we added oversight with the GAO and the Inspector General. We did away with the golden parachutes. We put in restrictions on executive pay, which I think needs to be tightened up, by the way, more than it is. And then we put a lot of that. We also added some other things that are desperately needed here in the state of Iowa. Senator Grassley had worked very hard to get through the production tax credit for wind energy and the extension of that and the extension of the biofuels tax credit. Plus, there were some tax benefits in there for victims of the floods in Iowa. Senator Grassley got that in there. Very important to the state of Iowa. I got a provision in there that will help build ethanol pipelines from Iowa to the East Coast, which the oil companies have been opposed to for a long time, but I finally got it in there. That was in there. But there was one other thing that we put into that package that I've been trying to do for a long time. I got it passed on my bill in 2002, but then the House stopped it. We've been trying ever since to get it done, David, and it's this: mental health parity. Mental health parity is now signed into law, so health insurance companies can't discriminate between mental health and physical health. That is very important.
Mr. Reed, aren't those all good things for Iowa?
I think they are, but I still think the overwhelming matter is that the bailout was a bad idea. You reward bad behavior, you get more bad behavior. We just gave a license to Wall Street to do whatever they want to do.
I just might add, one of the things that we've got to do when we come back, either in a special session or in January, and the Secretary has the authority to do this now, but I think it ought to be in law. And that is that we ought to legislate and make sure that this paper that they're going to buy, these derivatives and stuff, and even like the money they put in the banks last week, they put it in preferred stock. That means the taxpayer comes first. I want to legislate that. I want to make sure that no matter what we buy, and we hold on, if the value increases, the taxpayer comes first, not the shareholder, not the stockholder.
I'll be sure to act on that when I get there in January.
Well, regardless of how this country got to where it is, I want to look ahead, Mr. Reed. What do you think we need to do now? What more do we need to do now to get this economy going again?
Well, the first thing you do is you don't raise taxes on businesses and individuals in a time of bad economy. You don't raise taxes on them. The Democrat plan is to raise taxes on Social Security benefits, raise taxes across the board. They're saying they're not, but I own a small business. My small business gross sales might approach that $250,000 threshold that's being thrown out there. That will allow me to not hire more people, maybe even potentially have to lay them off. And the new equipment purchase I'm looking at will go right out the window if I start getting taxed heavier. And with the Social Security tax increase that's on the table and waiting, that means I'm going to have to match more of my employees' funds, which means that's less people I can hire. The hiring I'm looking at doing is not going to happen. And then my employees are going to have more taken out of their checks, so therefore they're going to want a raise.
Who's proposed raising Social Security taxes?
That's what I'd like to know.
The Obama plan is to raise Social Security taxes.
Senator, care to respond?
Well, that's a new one on me. I've never heard that one before. I have to look that up. To get the economy going, I think, first of all, jobs. We've got to get jobs going in this economy, and that may mean some stimulus. And we need to take, again, some of the $700 billion that we gave on Wall Street. $250 has already been put into banks. I think we're going to need about maybe $150 billion of that, or maybe a little bit more, to actually put it in a jobs program. Rebuilding sewer and water systems in this country. Every town in Iowa, by the way, by 2018 has to have separation of storm water and sewer water. These communities can't afford to do that. This is good job. This is a good jobs program for us to do. Rebuilding schools, like these grants that I've been getting for Iowa to do. Rebuilding our schools, highways, roads, bridges. The beautiful thing about something like that is that when you put money into those kind of construction jobs, the work is done here. It can't be shipped off to China or India. Secondly, most of the materials you buy, for example, in schools, let's talk about rebuilding a school. The cement block, the re-rods, the wallboard, the tiles, the lights, the conduits, the plumbing. David, most of this is made in America. So that if you do this kind of work, the dollar multiplies and spins around in America much more than if you're buying something from a foreign country. So get our jobs going. Secondly, start us on the path of energy independence. Right now we're spending $600,000 a minute, every minute of every day for imported oil. That's money leaving this country. Put that into biofuels, put that into wind energy in this country, put it into electric automobile manufacturing, give tax breaks and incentives to businesses to build these kinds of things. The last thing I would say on our economy is we've got to do something about health care. We're spending $2.3 trillion a year on health care, and the World Health Organization says we're 37th in the world in terms of our health. We've got to make our health care more efficient, more effective, more affordable.
We want to talk more about health care in a moment, but Mr. Reed, anything else to add to this question of what do we have to do to get our economy going? You've said no tax increases. Anything else you'd like to see?
Well, it doesn't take government artificial inflation. It's a free market. That's what made our country the most robust economy in world history, is through the free market. It's not the government intrusion. Let the market be the market.
Are you worried at all? Go ahead.
Can I just say something about that? We all believe in capitalism, and we all believe in the free market. But how free of a free market? That is really the question. At my hearing a couple of weeks ago, someone said we want to make sure that we have a totally free market. That's what Alan Greenspan said in 1999 about not having jurisdiction over derivatives and swaps. He said, let the free market take care of it. Well, let's use an analogy. You want money to move efficiently, not necessarily freely. You want it to move efficiently. It's like traffic. Do you want traffic to move freely? If you want traffic to move freely, get rid of all the stoplights. Get rid of all the stop signs. Get rid of all the caution signs. You'll have it moving freely, but you're going to have a lot of wrecks. And that's the way I say
The
of
opposite-
capital. Capital needs some red lights and green lights and yellow lights and caution signs and regulations so that the capital moves efficiently, not necessarily freely.
Okay, the opposite of deregulation is regulation. Regulation equals more laws. I think there's nobody out there that can say that what we need is more laws in this country. There's enough on the books. What we need to do is make sure that people who are in charge are accountable to somebody. And it doesn't come through over-regulating and stifling. I'm not against some regulation, but it's over-regulation that Mr. Harkin is proposing that is going to stifle our economy and slow it down to ground zero.
Well, as I said, we have to have regulations, as we've just shown in the marketplace, in financial markets. We have to have regulations in there that set up certain ground rules, that set up transparency. And yes, the federal government has to be involved in that regulation to do that. Of course, you don't want to regulate every little thing out there. But we do have to have these regulations in place so that our capitalist system is able to function. Oh, they made the same arguments against Franklin Roosevelt in the New Deal too, but quite frankly, the New Deal saved our free market system.
Let's move on, gentlemen. Mr. Reed, flood relief. You come from eastern Iowa. A lot of people over there are upset at the slow pace of flood relief. What would you do as a U.S. Senator to move that along to help Iowans recover?
Well, what I would not have done is allowed the Congress to recess when it did and let the House Majority Leader go on a book tour. We had 4 members on Capitol Hill in her party that could have said, no, we're not going on break until the people of Iowa are taken care of. And what happens after the flood? Everybody went on break, and then we got hurricanes in Florida and Texas and the Gulf Coast. And now we've got people competing for what should have been taken care of in Iowa right away, and it was not. There was a lot of tours and grandstanding around downtown Cedar Rapids for photo opportunities of destruction, but nothing was taken care of. And now it took an economic calamity for them to put that into a bill to finally take care of Iowans.
Senator, on the narrow question of speeding along flood recovery relief, is there anything more that you think you can do or would do in another term to speed that along?
Well, yes, I did do something. A little bit of facts here. When the floods hit in June, the Congress, Senator Grassley and I worked very hard, along with the entire Iowa delegation. This was not a partisan issue whatsoever, to get $2.65 billion before the end of June, of which $300 million was for community development block grants. In fact, I had been on Air Force One with President Bush and former Congressman Nussle, the head of OMB, coming out to Iowa to get that $300 million in community development block grants. Well, the problem is HUD never got it out. That had nothing to do with us. We gave the administration the money, but HUD never came out with the money. I got a call from the Secretary of HUD the 1st of August saying that we'd approved this money, but then we never got it for another month. Well, what I did is in the recent package that we put through the $23 billion for disaster relief, I put a provision in that said that HUD, on the community development block grants, the $6.5 billion we put in there, HUD has to obligate 1/3 of it within 60 days. So 1/3 of that has to be obligated before December the 1st. No more foot dragging on the administration's part. So by December the 1st, 1/3 of that, or about a little over $2 billion, has to be obligated. Now, why is that good for Iowa? Because we have all our plans in place. Under the guidance and direction of Governor Culver and General Dardis, we have a good plan in place, so we'll be first in line to get that money.
Another issue that Iowans, Mr. Reed, are upset about, we all hear it, energy prices.
Sure.
Did we ever think we'd think that $2.50 gas was a good thing? I mean, people are still upset about it. Now we're going to face perhaps some high costs of heating here in the wintertime. What do we do to lower energy prices? What would you do?
Well, we need to become energy independent in this country, and it starts with drill here, drill now, and drill often. We spend $700 billion a year importing a product that is under our feet. That would be like owning a clothing store and still going to the mall every day and buying your clothes. We have to do the drilling now to get our own product instead of importing a product from countries who don't necessarily have our best interest in mind. We have to conserve, which Americans have already started to conserve. We drove 10 billion miles less in May than the May previous to that, 12 billion miles in June. We know how to conserve. We're smart, intelligent people. We know where to set our thermostats and things like that. So we know how to conserve. And the third is fostering, incentivizing alternative energy, wind, solar, and ethanol, especially in this state. I think Iowa has a unique opportunity to both feed and fuel the world, and I will make sure that that takes place. Now, we also need to foster nuclear because it's the cleanest, most efficient form of energy. And if it's good enough for France to power 78% of their country with nuclear, I think it's good enough for the United States of America.
Should the tariff on Brazilian ethanol be removed?
That's something I'd want to look into, but I would definitely want to make sure that Iowa has their fair shake before a foreign country does.
I mean, how do you square a tariff with your free market attitudes?
Well, I would want to look at it and make sure that, like I said, that Iowa is taken care of first. I want to make sure that if Iowa has a chance to provide that, it's going to come from Iowa, because we do have enough productivity in this state to both feed and fuel the world.
Senator, what are your thoughts about energy independence?
Well, I think that the first thing we have to do in the next Congress is to set the template and the goal for being energy independent in the next 10 years, and I believe we can do that. It involves some of the things that Christopher was talking about. I'm not opposed to drilling. The problem is drilling offshore is going to be too expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money. And we just don't have that much oil in this country. The reserves are way, way too low. Plus, no matter what we do, we still have about 3% of the oil reserves in the world. We're using about 25%. So there's no, as Boone Pickens said, there's no way we can drill our way out of this problem. And this is an oil man saying that. So we have to look for renewable energy, green jobs. This is the future. To build a new platform of renewable energy in this country, it's biofuels. We're #1 in the nation. That's why I put so much in the Farm Bill for cellulose energy, cellulose ethanol, to start making ethanol out of corn stalks and corn cobs and switchgrass and miscanthus and trees and things like that. That completely dwarfs anything we could ever get from the Outer Continental Shelf or any kind of drilling we could do in this country.
And how do you feel about tariffs?
I am for keeping the tariff on Brazilian ethanol. You bet I am.
How long?
It's a 54 cent tariff.
For how long? At what point do we say to producers in Iowa, you guys got to stand on your own here?
Well, I kept getting that argument from Phil Gramm and John McCain, by the way, in the past about ethanol. Ethanol should stand on its own 2 feet and all that kind of stuff. So I put a chart once out on the floor of the Senate to show all of the tax benefits that the oil companies have gotten for the last 100 years. And it dwarfs anything we've ever done for ethanol. Look, we got to be energy independent. Brazil put a lot of their government money into building up their system in transportation, roads, waterways, all kinds of things. So it wasn't just the, quote, free market in Brazil that gave them all this. The government heavily involved in it. So again, we have to keep the tariff on in order for our industry to grow and prosper in this country. The second thing we need to do is to continue to build more wind energy systems in this country. Iowa right now, we have thousands of jobs. People building the turbines, the blades, the towers. Now we've got kids going to Iowa Lakes Community College learning how to repair and fix these and keep them up. This is a whole new industry for Iowa and for America.
Mr. Reed, do you have anything you want to add to the energy discussion?
Yeah, I just think that we will be energy independent in this country because we're the most ingenuitive and enterprising country the world has ever known. But we can't ignore drilling because he says in 10 years we'll be energy independent. Well, what do we do for the next 10 years? Keep importing $700 billion worth of oil each year until we are energy independent? No, we need to get our own because right now we are funding countries who are rogue. We're funding Ahmadinejad. We're funding Hugo Chavez. People who have expressed their hatred for us. We're currently importing oil from them. And if we are going to be energy independent in 10 years, that's great. But we need to take care of it on our own and not be beholden to foreign governments for our oil.
Let's change subjects. Iraq. Mr. Reed, what do we do now?
What do we do now? We win.
How? What is winning?
Winning is one thing winning is not is waving a white flag of retreat and surrender and capitulating to our enemies and sending the wrong message abroad.
But what is winning? Winning
is doing the same thing we're doing in Iraq with the surge. We let General Petraeus take over. He brought us a surge that has worked and is working and has met every benchmark it was asked to make. And now we're going to do the same thing in Afghanistan.
Senator Harkin, what do we do about Iraq?
I think that just shows there is no definition of winning. I thought we were supposed to win in Iraq when we got rid of the weapons of mass destruction. We found out they were never there. Then we were supposed to have won when we got rid of Saddam Hussein. We did that. And then next we were supposed to win when we had a government in place, and that's happened. And so this idea of winning keeps being very elusive. First of all, Iraq was a terrible mistake.
Was your vote to authorize that war a mistake?
I did. one of the worst votes I ever cast, because I was lied to. I was lied to by this administration, and quite frankly, I gave a speech on the Senate floor at that time saying that my vote was not a vote to authorize to go to war. My vote was a vote to authorize the president to go to the UN to get more inspectors in Iraq. That's the way it was sold to us, David.
What do we do
know that.
now? What do we do now, Senator?
What we do now is do what Senator Obama has said, what even the Bush administration is doing right now, negotiating with Iraqis to set a timetable to get out of there. Now, we can't do it precipitously. We have to keep in mind, the protection of our troops is the first and most important thing we can do. But I do believe over 18 months, maybe 2 years, at the most 2 years, but at least within 18 months, we can be completely out of Iraq safely and send the signal to the Iraqis. They have to get their act together. They have to make the political judgments and the political compromises necessary to run their country.
Mr. Reed, can we get out of there in 18 months?
Well, for starters, you don't put a timetable on it, and the Iraqis are taking control. There's over 470,000 members of the Iraqi Guard. There's 90,000 Sunni and Shiite volunteers in the inner cities. When the Guard can't be around, they're volunteering to guard their cities. Iraq is taking it over. But see, we're taking advice from somebody who has an 8-year history of becoming the Tokyo Rose of al-Qaeda and Middle East terrorism. The white flag of surrender, accusing our Marines of torture, voting to defund our troops while they're in harm's way, those are all records of having an anti-American policy. We need somebody who believes in the United States of America, believes we have the most professional and powerful fighting force the world's ever known. Let them do their job. The troops over there are saying, let us do our jobs. Don't defund us. Don't pull the rug out from underneath us. Don't snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Let them do their job and let the generals on the ground, in the field, lead the way.
You invoked Tokyo Rose. What do you mean by that?
Providing aid and comfort to the enemy, giving them a timetable. If you're playing football...
Who's doing that?
Mr. Harkin and his party. He advocated leaving Iraq. He advocated defunding our troops while they're in the middle of a war.
Mr. Reed, giving aid and comfort to the enemy is accusing someone of treason. Is that what you're accusing him of?
No, I'm accusing him of giving our enemies the playbook, saying, hey, guess what? We're going to be out by June 1st of next year. They're going to go into hiding. They're going to go in hiding. As soon as we leave, then they're going to come back. They're all going to go back to Iran. They're going to come back as soon as we leave because they know the timetable now, and they're going to come in and take over, and then we're going to be right back there forcing these kids to go back again, and the fight is going to be harder, and our enemy will be more determined because they will have been allowed to claim victory over the United States of America, the world's lone superpower. We're going to allow them to embolden their followers, recruit more people, and then they're going to bring that fight over to Main Street America. And I have children that go to school, and I'm not willing to think about roadside bombs in Marion, Iowa.
But why do didn't you just accuse Senator Harkin of anti-Americanism?
I believe that some of his positions and speeches were. I watched an ACLU speech that he gave where he outwardly accused our Marines of torture. No burden of proof, but accused them of torture, and I think that's wrong. As a former member of the military, I take that very seriously when you accuse a fellow member of the military of torture without the burden of proof. Senator,
how do you respond to that?
Well, it's hard to know where to begin. I'm very proud of my military service, and I am as dismayed by torture as anyone else when our troops do it, and when our government engages in that activity, whether it's Abu Ghraib or whether it's at Guantanamo. I think we have to be better than that. I think what the Bush administration and Dick Cheney and Rumsfeld, what they did, has given us an image around the world that we shouldn't have, that we're going to engage in the same kind of torture that our enemies are engaged in. We have to be better than that. We didn't engage in the same kind of torture, for example, that our enemies did in World War II. We just didn't do those things, and we shouldn't today. And so, yes, mark me down. Mark me down as someone who is going to do everything he possibly can on the Defense Appropriations Committee or wherever I serve to make sure that no one in our military or our CIA or our government can ever again in the future engage in things like waterboarding and torture. We have to be above that.
And how do you respond specifically to the phrase aid and comfort to the enemy and anti-American?
Well, again, these kinds of personal attacks are what people get sick of in politics. This ankle-biting kind of personal attacks that you're anti-American. This is nonsense. This is nonsense, and people don't want that. If Mr. Reed wants to talk about what he would like to do in Iraq and stuff, that's fine. He every reason, he has every right to be able to do that. I have my right to say what I would want to do. And quite frankly, what I'm saying to do in Iraq is basically what the Bush administration is doing right now. They're negotiating with Iraq for a timetable to get out of Iraq. I think that's the proper way to go.
Mr. Reed, do you have any concerns about the Bush administration, what they're doing on that?
I guess the inclination is, or the indication is that I'm part of the Bush administration, which I'm not.
I'm asking you, he mentioned, Senator Harkin mentioned the Bush administration and what they're doing in Iraq. I want to know if you disagree with that.
What I want to do is what the generals on the ground say to do. So
Don't you think it's a little over the top to invoke the phrase anti-American and aid and comfort to the enemy?
Listen, Dave, I've listened to these. He did serve in the military, but for 34 years we've seen the exploits of Mr. Harkin. In the 70s with John Kerry, he accused our troops in Vietnam of torture. In the 70s, when he was a freshman senator, he went down with John Kerry again, with Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas. And, so it's just, past history is the best indicator of future actions. And I think a history of siding with one's enemies and claiming the benevolence of an enemy over the benevolence of the United States of America. I never once heard him deride our enemy for decapitating soldiers and dragging their carcasses down the roads. I never heard any derision of that, but I hear open derision of our Marines and speculated, unproven torture.
Care to respond?
Well, I have never derided any person who puts on our uniform. And I challenge him to find one time when I've ever done that.
YouTube,
never.
ACLU speech.
Well, you put it out there.
Okay, sorry.
That's never happened. Am I going to say to the military, by the way, the Constitution does put the military under civilian leadership, by the way, am I going to say, look, there are certain things you shouldn't be doing or certain things you should be doing? I'm not going to just listen to every general. Generals serve under us. We appoint the generals. Senators actually vote on whether a general becomes a general or gets another star. And I don't think you can just leave, as he says, everything to the generals. Tactics, on the ground, once something is decided, yes. But in terms of strategy and goals, we can get through advice and consultation, but essentially it has to be decided by our civilian leadership in this country. And these terms of anti-American and all that kind of stuff, again, every time I travel around Iowa, people are just sick and tired of that kind of stuff.
Let's move on to another subject, immigration. Senator Harkin, what do we do with all the undocumented people who are in America today?
I think, first of all, on immigration, there's three things we need to do. First, secure our borders. Secondly, have more penalties for employers who employ undocumented aliens. And third, find a practical way of dealing with these undocumented, these 12 million in America, that does not grant them amnesty, but is also fair to the taxpayers of this country.
What is that?
We passed an immigration bill in 2006 that was supported by President Bush, supported by John McCain, and Republicans and Democrats. I believe that had a pathway to the future, but it was stopped by the House, and we've never been able to bring it up since.
Mr. Reed, what do you do with the 12 million undocumented people that are in this country?
Well, first of all, we need to get a border fence, man it and fortify it. We need to know who's coming, who's going, and what their intents are in this country. We need to know that there is a job here for them when they come. We need to start punishing employers who knowingly employ illegals. We need to start punishing landlords who knowingly rent apartments to illegals. If they don't have a place to live and they don't have a place to work, they're not going to come here. We also need to make it less ambiguous on how to become a citizen, because a lot of these people coming across the border, they come because it's too hard to wait in line. They don't know the exact pathway. But with the Department of Labor, I would like to work and come up with a plan of how many people we need for which jobs. Now, having said that, with our porous border to the south, it's not just the hardworking, honest farmer who wants to come here for a better life. We have vicious gang members like MS-13 coming across every night. We have documented Arab males coming across that border. And what I would like to say is if an Arab male is sneaking across our border in the middle of the night, he's not coming here for a job at Rockwell or John Deere. And then we have, recently, the Taliban has set up training camps in Venezuela. Now, why Venezuela? Because they know they have a regime down there with a shared hatred for the United States. They can train their terrorists and sneak them right up to our southern border. So first and foremost is getting that border shut down, and so we know who's coming and going. As for the people who are here, we have to remember one thing. One thing is we are a nation of laws and we are a sovereign nation. The people who are here are breaking the law being here, and we cannot afford to give them a Harkin orange card, i.e. amnesty, like we tried in 1986. Because again, when you reward bad behavior, you get more bad behavior. If we just grant them the right to be here and say, okay, we know you broke the law to get here, we know that you budged in line in front of all these other people trying to do it the right way, but guess what? We're just going to throw our hands in the air and give you amnesty. In 1986 we did it, and look at the flood we're getting now.
Another issue that we've got too little time and way too many issues yet to go, so I want to move on. Mr. Reed, Social Security and Medicare.
Yes.
How do you make those sound?
Well, first of all, Social Security you have to have a chance to opt out of. I think we need to give our citizens a chance to opt out of Social Security. It doesn't allow for any freedom. You should be able to take, if you take the Chilean example, for example, they can take a third of what was going to go to Social Security and put it into equity funds. Those people, after 40, 50 years, are retiring as millionaires. Why? Because they're not tied to a social system. If you take, today is October 23rd. An average worker has a 45-year work history in this country. So 1963, the Dow closed at 751.8. Right now, the market is down. We can both argue the market has fallen down a little bit. It's still at 8,500. Someone in 1963 who started saving on a stock market plan would still enjoy a 1,400% return on their investment. So the argument's going to be that I would like to turn Social Security over to the free market and look what the market's doing. Well, let's look at what the market's doing right now. And even with what it's doing, it's still a 1,400% return for those people, as opposed to the 2.5% return that Social Security would be giving these people. So it's a much more comfortable retirement when you're allowed to take control of your own and be responsible for your own destiny, not be beholden on the government. And the first step and the first thing crucial about Social Security is not to let people like Mr. Harkin raid that fund.
Senator Harkin, what do you want to do? What's your reaction to that, if you care to make one, and what do you want to do to make Social Security?
Well, first of all, I think what's happened in the markets recently shows that we shouldn't privatize Social Security. Thank God we stopped Newt Gingrich and that crowd from doing so in the 90s. Sure, if you were lucky enough to come in the market at a certain time and get out at a certain time, God bless you. But what if you came in at the market at one time and you got out right now? You'd have lost everything.
Well, Social Security is not a short-term trade.
Go ahead.
The point is that Social Security, by law, that money has to be invested in government securities backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. That means you can't lose. The government, as long as our government is there, Social Security is going to be there. That's the first thing. So it should be something that you can always bank on, that is not subject to the whims of the marketplace.
Mr. Reed, you had a comment about that?
Well, yeah, he's saying if you get in at a certain time when the market's down. We don't get into our retirement funds. You don't invest for retirement as a day trader. You get in for the long term. And the statistics that I showed, over the long haul, over 40 to 50 years, the market has noticeable growth, much higher than that of Social Security.
Okay, Senator, your next point?
That's not necessary. Again, it depends on when you get in and when you get out. The second thing is that Social Security right now is solvent until about 2049, I believe, or 2041 or 2049. There are some minor things we can do to fix it. We have in the past, and we're going to have to address it again. You could raise the $102,000 cap. Why is it that a working person in this country, a middle-class person, pays on every dollar they earn into Social Security? But someone who makes $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year doesn't pay on every dollar they earn. If you were to raise that cap, that would cover over 88% of any shortfall in the future on that. The second thing I would suggest that we might think about doing is including state and municipal workers in the Social Security system. You do a couple of those things and you don't have to worry. Social Security is going to be fine. The big problem we have right now is not Social Security. The big problem is Medicare. That's the big problem right now.
Gentlemen, we're down to about 3 minutes, and I would like to get a comment from each of you about health care before we close, okay? So, Senator, very quickly, what do you want to see in a health care change in the next Congress?
Number one, let's focus more on prevention and wellness, keeping people healthy in the first place. Medicare can't pay for you to get colonoscopies, things like that. Now, they ought to be involved in upfront diagnosis. And that means everything from our kids in school, making sure they got better food in school, they got better exercise, workplace wellness, giving incentives to businesses to have workplace wellness programs, community wellness programs. We've got to get ahead of this and keep people healthy. The second thing we need to do is to change Medicare right now. As I mentioned, that's the big problem. But the Republican Congress passed, I voted against it, this Medicare drug benefit, and in there it forbids Medicare from negotiating with the drug companies to get the cheapest price. VA, the Veterans Administration, gets their drugs 50% cheaper than Medicare. We got to get the same deal for Medicare recipients.
Mr. Reed?
Okay. Well, I would say Medicare is a big problem under Mr. Harkin's leadership. Iowa ranks 51st out of 50 states in Medicare reimbursement. That's wrong for Iowa. We need someone who's going to fight to level that playing field. That means even Puerto Rico gets a higher reimbursement rate. Medical care is not mobile. That's why it doesn't pay for things like he said, wellness and health care. I mean, prevention. It doesn't pay for that because it's not mobile. It doesn't go with people. So no health insurance company right now wants to pay for prevention because they know whoever they're paying for it with is going to go to another health care plan when they move jobs or get to a different age. So we need to make health care more mobile. We also need to open it up to the free market. We cannot entrust the same government that is bankrupting Social Security to take over our health care system.
Gentlemen, we're running out of time. We've got a couple minutes left. Senator Harkin, in 30 seconds, what do you want the people of Iowa to remember about you as they head into the voting booth in November?
Well, what I want, first of all, is to thank the people of Iowa very much for their help and their support through all these years. It's been an honor and a privilege to represent Iowans in the United States Senate. Just remember that when times are tough, you need a steady hand and someone who's effective. I've proven I can do that. You need someone who can work across the aisle with others to get things done. I've done that with the Americans with Disabilities Act, with farm bills, with a whole host of things. Next thing, remember, I only have one goal, to use whatever seniority you've given me to be steady, effective, and to build a stronger Iowa and a stronger America.
Thanks, Senator. Mr. Reed.
I want people to know, they know Washington is broken. They know it can't be fixed by sending the same man back for a 5th term. You need to send somebody there that is not beholden to any special interest groups or outside corporations. You need somebody who is from Iowa, who lives in Iowa, and represents Iowans as the average Iowan. Someone who will go to Washington and look out for them because he knows that they're the boss and that they vote him in. And I know what it is like to be an Iowan. I know what it's like to be a small business owner. I know what it is to work within a budget. So I will look out for Iowa families, and I will make sure that they're taken care of in the Senate too. But it will not be with earmarks and wasteful government spending.
And one last,
Thank you, gentlemen. We're out of time, Senator.
You're out of time.
I'm sorry.
All right.
We just can't go on. Thank you. I'd love to, but the clock is the master. Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for taking time to be with us. And thanks again, too, to the staff at Iowa Public Television for their time and effort in broadcasting this conversation with the candidates. I'm David Yepsen of the Des Moines Register, and thank you for joining us.
Funding for this program was provided by Friends of Iowa Public Television, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, and generations of families and friends who feel passionate about Iowa Public Television programs.